Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And today we have the absolute pleasure of having Ben Samama here on the channel. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to hearing your story as a songwriter from a different country and hearing your journey from that country to America, and also what it looks like to be an immigrant working in America and how that's starting in America. And we were talking a little bit before we even got started about how makes it a little bit more difficult when you first move here and you don't know anything or anybody about that stuff. So I'd love to hear your story. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely,
it's really fun.
Bright and early for you over in LA at the moment. It's 9:30 in the morning, so I appreciate you having your morning coffee here with me.
It's all good. I'm here. I'm awake. We wake up usually fairly early. So
Well, thank you. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your story. If for people that aren't familiar with you and your story, can you kind of give a little bit of just tell me who you are and what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Ben Samama. I'm from The Hague, which is a town outside of Amsterdam. I grew up in a musical family. My parents were classical musicians, are still classical musicians, and I was surrounded by an orchestra, choirs. My brothers are both musicians. It ran in the family to a point where I don't think I have any other skills, to be honest. And what it means is that I just don't have a plan B. I never had, quote unquote, a real job. I never had a studio or like a desk job. I never done anything besides practice music and then try to make a living from it. I went to college in Holland called the Royal Conservatory, which is for jazz voice, very hoity-toity, like all that super like old-timey stuff. Throughout that time, I realized, oh no, actually I love pop music. But what I thought was pop music, because that's the only pop music that they allowed in that school, was like Al Green and Jackson 5 and Curtis Mayfield. And then I was offered a scholarship to go to the US. And that's how I ended up in Berkeley in Boston. That basically opened up the music industry in the US to me, which I didn't really know much about. I just knew that I wanted to do pop music, and I loved soul music in the 60s inspired. And I was like, well, let's go to where that is made originally. Let's go to the birthplace of that place. So I just went to the US and I met so many friends, and everybody was talking about the life of a songwriter as opposed to the life of a performer. Because in Holland, at least back then, you weren't really able to just be a writer. It wasn't really a thing. You perform it, you write for yourself. That's the life, or at least that's what I thought was the life. And I don't necessarily love performing so much. So when they said, you could just be a writer, there's a career for that, I was like, oh my God, I found my place. And then I just never left. I kind of stayed. My friends moved to New York. I followed them. My friends moved to LA. I followed them. In the meantime, dealing with immigration, originally trying to get the F1 visa, then trying to get the O1 visa, then living on an O1 for 10 years. So that means 3 extensions. Each of them was 3 years, one was 1 year. I think that's what it was. And then meeting my wife, we've been together 11 years, and then we got married 3 years ago. And that's kind of now why I have the green card. Yeah, thank you so much. And now I'm on the green card through that process, but I would have gotten it anyway, because you can start applying for that if you have X amount of things done, or if you're here for an X amount of time. So it would have been one or the other. And that's kind of how it happened. I fell in love with the place and I never left, even though I didn't set out to become like a songwriter in the pop industry. I just kind of went with it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to hear more about that. First of all, I want to comment on the fact that you must be quite the remarkable musician to go to. I mean, like, Berkeley's quite the school, and you must come from quite the musical family to go to a conservatory in Holland and then to come to Berkeley on a scholarship to come to Berkeley. Like, that's the top of the cream of the crop.
I mean, if you talk about the amount of luck it took me to get there, was astounding in a way that, one, yes, I was raised in a musical family. One, that's lucky part number one. Lucky part number two, I got this scholarship from. Not even from Berkeley. I mean, they gave me a little bit of money because I was a jazz vocal major, and they loved that. And back then in that school, like, if you did anything related to jazz, they would just throw money at you. And that's, I got some scholarship for that. But then mostly there was a scholarship out of Holland called the Huygens Fonds, I think is what it's called, that basically said, if you qualify, you'll get a full ride. Boom, go away. We don't want you here. We want you to go to the US and do what you want to do. And I was the only one who applied because no one else knew about it. It was this brand new thing.
Wow.
And I was just lucky enough to have an advisor in my old college who said, "Did you know about this thing? I don't think anyone else does. If you apply, most likely you're going." So I applied, and they gave me full scholarship.
Wow.
I didn't have to pay a single thing. Berkeley is expensive.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
is. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anyone honestly that can pay that unless you have scholarship help.
Uh-huh.
Unless you come from far away and you have like, family money or something, but mostly I certainly didn't. So I got to Berkeley and basically, which is funny because I got in on a jazz scholarship and then didn't do jazz the entire time. Because I
Oh,
was
wow.
like, I want to write songs and I want to do pop music. And I met all my friends there and they're all like educating me basically on American pop, which I didn't know much about. I mean, you hear it in passing in the car and on the radio and MTV, but I wasn't like inundated with Britney Spears and hip hop or any of that stuff. I was inundated with Bill Evans, with Rachmaninoff, with Shostakovich, with
Yeah.
with Jackson 5 and Curtis Mayfield and all the things that I thought was pop music. So it was a large transition for me to go into currently what is pop music and what I make now, which is like pop. And I
Bubblegum
love
pop.
making it. Yeah, bubblegum pop or anything. Even, I do a lot of work in Korea, and
Yeah.
that currently, you could definitely call that bubblegum pop, but it's also, I make a lot of funk records with artists there, and, I
Yeah.
kind of like go back into my roots, but generally like understanding the full landscape of like what pop means or what it can be.
Absolutely. Well, it just stands for popular music, right?
It stands for popular music, and it's whatever currently is poppin'. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? And also for me, the finding the love for music that I haven't heard before, or finding the love to make something that I necessarily wouldn't make myself, like, more heavier rock music or emo music that that didn't grow up on. I talk to anyone here, they all grew up on Blink-182. It's in their bones.
Sure.
Most people from
Yeah,
the US, they know, you know what I mean? And they understand it and they live it. And I just grew up in this like very art bubble, have you heard the latest Kurt Elling record? Which is, again, a name that no one knows. It's like a jazz singer. So for me, I had to like inundate myself and re-educate myself a little bit on like what American culture is and not just what American culture was in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
Because that's what I thought American culture was, musically at least.
Now, would you say, something that I'm curious about is like, would you say that a lot of Europe is still in like, I don't know, wouldn't use the word bubble, but like very,
Yeah.
like a lot of classical music or all the classical music came from Europe. So like, is that still a heavy focus in Europe?
No,
as opposed
just
to
my
like,
parents.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just my parents, and it's the world I grew up in, which is like this very kind of art forward place. In a way, it was fairly sheltered musically because I didn't know much about pop music.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Holland or Europe in general. It's just that was my family. Definitely watched a lot of TV and watched a lot of MTV, and it kind of just washed it over me. But I didn't really pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And that's just what's interesting now. 20 years later, I use that as part of what sets me apart as a writer because I know that I have ideas that have been, rambling around in my brain for the last 20 years that come from that world. And if I find a way to modernize that, or if I find a way to like make that more not medium, but like more top 40, then that's a fresh idea.
Yeah.
And I ended up, that's a lot of the shtick I have right now for myself is how do I grab the thing that I know more than anyone else, which is like, art music,
Yeah.
and make that American pop.
Yeah.
And that way, you kind of become the guy that does that. And, in the end, I meet a lot of people that come from that world as well. And we all kind of like talk the same language. And it's an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And,
Yeah.
it's funny how like perspective is everything. And, one could say, oh, wow, like you might be at a disadvantage because you didn't grow up listening to pop music. But it's interesting how you see that, like, first of all, like, it's actually an advantage because I can pull from what I did grow up listening to. But also, I would say it's an advantage in the sense that it's actually, you don't, like, I'm sure you've been doing this for a while, but, like, I think we hear these preconceived notions of what it's supposed to be like and what it's supposed to sound like. You come into the game and you don't necessarily have all those preconceived notions. You make what you think it should sound like.
Right.
According to you, or what sounds good, without having the skew of like, oh, this is I grew up on all that
Yes.
pop. I grew up on
Well,
Britney Spears and NSYNC.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
like
I think I look at it in this way. I needed all the experience of learning the rules
Yeah.
by way of like the song math. And that takes you a long time. It took me a lot of years and a lot of hours if you're thinking like in terms of like 10,000 hours, right? And then now I'm at the point where I go back into my old ideas from 15 years ago when I didn't know a single thing. And I'm like, ooh, that is fresh.
yeah.
But back then I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah,
Now I'm like, ooh, I can grab this, I can grab this. That's fresh, that's not so fresh, that's cool, that's weird. If I flippity flop it like that, then I can make this something that people haven't heard before, but it still feels familiar because we're still following all the math rules. And that way, I think that's where you can turn what used to be just a weird idea or a strange idea or a too far left idea into, if I just add this amount of math to it, now it's a fresh pop idea.
Yeah. So I'm a music
yeah.
theory nerd, so I'd love that. I'm curious your definition of math, and for the people that are super familiar with music theory or whatever you're necessarily referring to, I'd love if you could actually elaborate into a little bit more of the pop math and what you.
When I think math, I don't think chords. I think chorus, verse, pre-chorus,
Okay.
energy, up, down. Like, is this melody too busy than the melody that comes after? Like, if the verse is busy, the pre-chorus should be less busy. If the verse is low, the chorus should probably be high. If the if the verse has really strange chord progression, then the chorus you probably want to keep it really simple. Just how do you find the balance between what's currently acceptable, if you want to call it that, what's currently cool within the pop space, within the top 40 radio, but how do you break that a tiny bit so you can pull from things that I would listen to when I was a kid and say, okay, I have this like chorus that feels very good and very strong, but kind of standard. How do you add 10% weird to it? So it's something that people haven't heard before, but it's not scary.
Yeah.
And if I go to an old idea from 15 years ago that's in my phone somewhere, on my computer somewhere, I'm like, well, that's 80% crazy. But if I just grab that one little piece that feels special to me and then add to that like a very well-crafted pop moment, then you have like the cool with the normal, let's say.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times in those terms, you think in terms of collaborations as well. You have writers that are very, very good at like writing perfect, normal, quote unquote, choruses, but then you need to add somebody who does really wild shit to make that slightly wilder. But if you just let the guy who does wild things by himself, it wouldn't be pop music.
It
would be too crazy. Yeah, or like it would be too wild. It would be, you would call it more like an artist record, or you would call it more like a personal thing, or it could live really strongly in like a subculture, but it wouldn't live like in the top 40, let's say middle range of like what top 40 currently sounds like.
Yeah. How would you define top 40 at the moment? Like if you had to put it into words.
Unfortunately, right now it's whatever TikTok blows up. Top 40 at this moment is whatever people want to hear, and with the advent of TikTok, it is whatever goes kaboomies online. And that means that it is the freshest sound it's currently been on the radio, because radio responds to TikTok. It also means that there's not really anything that we can aim at. You know what I mean? There's not. You can't say like the current sound is this. No, its current sound is whatever TikTok tells you it is.
Why do you say the word unfortunately? You started that phrase with unfortunate. I'm curious why.
Because for us.
For
us as
chasing that.
For us as professionals.
Yeah.
It means that it's chaos. And you don't aim anymore at, well, this is a current sound. That doesn't really exist anymore. You now go for artists. TikTok responds to artists and entertainers, and sometimes a song, sometimes a random sound within a song, sometimes like the bridge in a song can blow up on TikTok, and now that whole thing is on the radio. But you can't say, well, I write modern, quote unquote, modern music, therefore that is X, Y, and Z at the moment. 5 years later, it might be different again. TikTok has turned everything upside down by way of, I don't know what's current anymore. The only thing I do know what's current is artists that are cool. So you work with artists that are cool that might go up on TikTok. In that way, it's chaotic. It's also freeing because you now can do whatever you want. As long as you have an artist that you can do it with, it doesn't really matter, because it doesn't have to sound like what's currently, quote unquote, the new sound. It can be anything.
The diversification or what's the word? Democratization of
Yes.
fame and success, I guess. Has been really interesting to watch. And I filmed the video. At this point, I had to be 5 years old, 6 years old at this point, and I was talking about it, the democratization of fame and success, and how but it's interesting to see how even further and further it's becoming. Where you go 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, right, to England at the monarchy, right? You had some really, really famous people and some really rich people, and then you had everybody else was poor, right?
Yeah.
And now you had 10 rich people, and then everybody else was poor. Now it's as time has gone, especially with the creation of social media and TikTok and all this stuff, right? It's becoming the gap between the famous and the rich is now getting wider, and more and more people are seeping into that thing. What I find really interesting about that is it's becoming more accessible, is I guess the word I'm saying.
Yes.
To the average person, which it wasn't before. What I find interesting is the fact of my wife can be like, "Oh, have you heard this viral sound on TikTok?" And I'm like, "No, have you? But have you heard this viral sound?" And it's interesting to be these songs both have now 10 million streams on Spotify, and I've never heard of this one, and she's never heard of this one, but they're still both famous. It's weird because they're famous at the same time, but not at the same time now.
I mean, Michael Jackson doesn't exist anymore, where the entire planet has heard of him. Now everybody finds their little pocket and has their very sequestered subculture that they're famous in, which in a way is it's good if you want to have I look at it this way. Back then, quote unquote, back in the olden days, you would go on tour with your band and you would find your fans and they would come to your show. TikTok is basically the online version of that, where you find your group and they come to your videos and they respond to your videos and they make videos based on your music and whatever. It's the same thing. You just find your very dedicated core of fans that love you, except nobody gets off their couch.
Yeah.
Which is, weird, but also it's very convenient because you don't have to tour anymore. Eventually, yes, but I'm seeing it happen right now with my buddy Eric, who I produce with and who's my very close friends, and we have a project called Sex on the Beach. And literally the life that we would lead, which is get in the tour bus and perform for a small amount of people next to a larger amount of people next door, a huge amount of people, you're literally watching it grow from video to video, and it's the exact same trajectory. Eventually, it might blow up into the mainstream audience, and then you get on the radio. But again, that can happen overnight because TikTok is chaos. Yeah. Right? You could do a video with a song with a funny video with a funny dance for some reason, because the TikTok machine decided this is now the new thing and everybody latched onto it. Now you're on the radio for no reason. I think not for no reason, but for the reason that TikTok has decided to upstream it in a way. I think what happens is people respond to great entertainment, and that could mean many things. That can have many faces, but usually it means a good song with an interesting sound, with a great performer that's part of it, whether it's someone with an interesting story or someone with an interesting face or someone with a great voice. I think recently now you have to be interesting more than the hottest guy or girl in the room. You know what I mean? Because there's no machine anymore to say, okay, I'm going to invest $2 million into you and we're going to force you onto the radio, which might have been the thing 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Still, it's democratization by that way. It also means, who knows? The bets are all off, which is, frightening, but also freeing in a way.
It's been really interesting because so this is where my brain goes. I love that we're talking about this because I find this stuff super interesting as somebody that I wouldn't say follows culture, but more so dissects culture. What is that called? That's called something. Is it sociology? I guess they call it in I don't know, whatever. Point being though is I love watching and kind of being well, what's working, why is it working, and where is society going, and why. I'm a thinker. I guess it's also why I'm a songwriter too, because songwriting is just thinking the same thing 15 times until you're oh, that's a good lyric. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that being said, you mentioned there's no more Michael Jacksons, and I think about a lot. I don't know if they will ever. I think that what's his name? Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift. Yeah. I think that those are the last household names that are going to be like that. That generation.
Possibly.
You know, unless something else changes crazy. But like, it's so interesting to see like these musicians that are like wildly famous, like selling out like pretty. Like I know a guy that's playing the Barclay Center, and you go on the street and people like, you know, which people I know is where the Knicks play. It's a big, I don't know. Would you call it a stadium or would you? I don't know what arena.
In Boston? I think
No, it's in New York, Brooklyn.
Oh, whoopsies.
Whatever.
I don't know.
But whatever. Like it's like, and it's not Gillette Stadium, but it's you know probably 20,000 people, or you know, it's like playing Madison Square Garden essentially, that size.
Yeah.
It's bigger than Madison, I think, actually. And like you go on the street and nobody knows his name. You know, the guy's making $1 million a month from his music, and nobody knows his. And it's just like it's weird. You know, it's crazy. Like, but he could sell 20,000 tickets in Manhattan or in Brooklyn, and it's like wow, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think. Well, personally, that sounds incredible to me because I hate being recognized on the street if that ever happens. But yes, I think again, like you find your core fans, and then you grow with them. I think people don't get really, really, really famous until they start acting, because acting, movies, especially big movies, they still feel like a monoculture where everyone has seen the latest Twister or whatever, or the latest Marvel movie or Star Wars, or I feel like there's actor level fame and then there's musician level fame. And I think Taylor Swift is the only one, and Ed Sheeran and whoever like are the only ones that like got to that point, but most musicians don't become famous until they start acting. Like famous, like fuck you famous. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and how many of them did like Will Smith started acting, and you know Jennifer Lopez started acting. And that's very interesting, actually. That's a really interesting, you know. I
just think it's because the bar's higher. You know, movies that become worldwide famous, they have an infusion of $500 million of cash, and they don't take chances on that unless you are a star. In which case you can handle that movie, or you can lead something like that. Music, the bar is just different and way lower because anyone from anywhere can upload to TikTok and kaboom, now it's huge for like 2 weeks and then it's gone again, right? Which means that a lot more people have a shot at it, which is amazing. But it also means that it's not going to like permeate in the culture as long as it does. You're not going to be on all the billboards. You're not going to be like on every TV screen or every movie screen. Your face isn't like plastered all over LA like it is
Britney Spears was,
stars.
You know, 20 years ago.
Exactly, like Britney Spears was, or like Michael Jackson was, or Whitney Houston, or all, you know, like these tent pole kind of names. Which again, that's not bad or good. It's just that's the new reality of it. And for me as a songwriter and a producer, it just means that anyone has a shot, and anyone is worth taking a shot at if you love the music. I think, you know, there was a moment where everyone's trying to get on the Usher record or on the Rihanna record or on the whatever record, and then you have this like very competitive, like, well, you know, kind of rat race climbing kind of attitude. Now, none of that exists anymore in a way. I mean, yeah, sure, if you're working with Taylor Swift, you're killing, but like now you find an artist that you truly love because you think it's cool, and you work on their project, and then if it goes well, awesome. And if it doesn't go well, you know, who knows, it might go well next year because TikTok. Yeah. In a way, like it's democratizing for me as well. I don't have to like fight to get on certain projects. I mean, I'd like to, and I'll still try, but it's not the only way to make a living anymore. In that way, it feels more, I mean, it's by one way, it's more relaxing because you can do whatever you want and with people that you love and make music that you really, really want to make. Also, you'll never be a crazy billionaire, which I'm okay with that, honestly. It's, you know, it's just a different set of rules. And as long as you keep making the music that you love and that the music you set out to make in the first place, I don't think it's such a bad thing.
Yeah,
does it make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
Which is interesting because, like, the stuff that, you know, typically does go quote unquote viral is very often not. How do I phrase this? Like, something goes viral, and then people like, oh, I should make that kind of music, but then
that's over. Yeah.
But that doesn't go, like, that doesn't work. It's like you just need to make the music that you want to make, and that's what goes viral.
There was a time when, early on, the new wave, everybody's wearing long hair and everybody's like makes like psychedelic rock music, and if you do that, then you know that you're with the cool kids. That part is over. Like a song will blow up that sounds like a 50s hillbilly, like a 50s not hillbilly, sorry, a 50s rockabilly record. Yeah. And then the next month, something will blow up that sounds like it's like synthesizers up your face. You know what I mean? Nothing about that sonically is something that you should aim at. You just do what you love.
Exactly.
And honestly,
which is freeing as an artist.
Yeah, I think also for me, like once I realized that one, the rules had changed because of TikTok and online culture, and also, because I went down that rabbit hole of like doing what I think people wanted to hear from me, and it never worked out. This is like the biggest piece of advice I got from my publisher was, if you don't truly love the thing you make, people will feel it. They might not know why it doesn't sound good or feel good, but they can feel it. If I write a record that I don't necessarily love, but I do it because I was told to do it, or because the artist wanted it to, or because that's the current style, unless there's someone in a room who loves it that can say, that's cool, that's not cool, let's do that, let's do this, like, and be the driving force. If it's just me doing, for example, like a Blink-182 record. I didn't grow up on that music. Like, I can fake it, probably. But every time I did, it came out wrong. It just came out feeling fake.
Yeah.
And then once I started making music that I grew up on or love, which is like, very much James Brown inflected, funk heavy, drums forward, busy bass, 70s, 60s music, all of a sudden people were like, oh, that is cool. Mm-hmm. I'm like, really? Because it's not very hip. It's not very current. They're like, well, we don't care, because we can tell that you love it, and therefore we love it too. Yeah. We can feel the enthusiasm in the music, and that gets us excited. Yeah. And that was the biggest tip I ever got, which was do what you love anyway, because people will feel that you love it when you make it, and that will set you apart, first of all, but also it'll just be better.
Yeah.
And people will feel that as well.
Exactly.
And I did years and years and years in this town of doing music that I thought that's what people were currently looking for, because that's what the industry tells you. Publishers, managers, labels, whoever, they're like, oh, this is the thing. We should be doing this because, X, Y, and Z reason that just was the number one. And I'm like, all right, I guess we're doing another heavy rock record, or another trap record, or another record that I don't necessarily grew up on, and it's not in my bones. Yeah. And the moment I let that go and just said, okay, but what do I love? Where do I find artists that do what I love, so I actually have something to tell and actually have something to support them with my knowledge, my very deep knowledge of funk records and soul records and 60s and 70s music. I actually have something to contribute, and not just running behind like the guy who knows Blink-182 by heart, which, by the way, that's a lot of people in this town because they grew up on that music. They come from here. That's when things start to shift for me as well on a career level. That was a breaking point for me. Like, oh, I've done my 10,000 hours of like math and rules and knowing what a good song sounds like. And now how do you make it great? Is by infusing your love into the music and doing the thing that you truly love, plus all the math. And that's when things start to shift. And that
it's like breaking the rule. You have to learn the rules to break the rules, kind of thing.
It's that, but you have to know how to break it in a way that gets people excited.
Yeah,
and
the way that you enjoy.
In the way that I love, because again, if I love what I just made, people are going to feel that. They might not know why, but they do.
It's so interesting, man. Like on that train of thought, there's a deli. Do you guys have delis in LA, or is it just in New York? Okay. Because you go to Florida and you don't have delis. It's crazy. So this is deli right by me, and like this, you walk in and there's this dude that's there a couple days a week, and he has such passion for making these sandwiches. He's like, bro, and of course he's from New York. So, bro, I just made this roast beef that you gotta try. Here, just try it. And it's like, I may or may not like whatever he's trying to sell me. Like, he's not even trying to sell me. He's just passionate about that. Like, I'm now excited about this roast beef sandwich. You know what I mean? Because he's so excited about it. And it's the same thing, it's very unrelated, but the same exact thing is like when you're passionate and really excited about the project that you're working on, whether or not some people like the genre, they will feel that passion, as opposed to being like, oh, I love the Blink-182 song, like style, but like if it's not authentic to you, I'm not gonna like the song, even if I like that style. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because there's something inauthentic about it.
No, absolutely. I think if a big part of what makes pop music so exciting is that the culture keeps driving forward to something new. It's like a meme that gets like someone makes a meme, and then a week later that meme is evolved into like the counter meme, and that gets evolved into like the memification of that counter meme, and now everyone's talking about like the fourth like generation of that meme. And if you don't know the original meme, you don't know what the fuck is going on. Mm-hmm. Why is this version of this like the dude looking backwards at the other girl, like that famous picture? Why is there a response to a response to a response unless you're on top of what the original was and every move that it made? It's not a funny joke. I don't know what does that even mean, right? In the same way, I know 60s and 70s music so well. I can make all the references and all the inside jokes, and I can do like the little licks, and I can say the words and play a saxophone a certain way that everyone who knows that music really well is like, ooh, I see what you did there. That's clever, right? Blink 182, no clue.
Yeah,
I have no idea. I'll always run behind the times. I'll always feel dated because every time I can't be in front of the wave when I make a new record in that style. Yeah. I'll always sound dated or behind the times or like a little tired or a cliche that I didn't know was a cliche. And that's what I've noticed with like the style that I quote unquote love and have been inundated with since birth. Classical music, jazz music, samba, artsy fartsy shit, plus like soul, Jackson 5, Michael Jackson, Curtis Mayfield, Otis Redding, all that stuff. That is in my bones, which means that I can now push that art forward, because when I hear a new record in that style, I'm like, oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
I see every reference you pulled. I get what you're doing. I can now grab that and go one step further. And then everyone's like, ooh, that's hip.
Yeah.
Whether they know why, they might not know why, but they know that it's hip.
Yeah.
And that it's different and that it's fresh and that it's not dated. A great example of that is I was working with this artist, not going to name names, and she's doing that kind of style of music, and she had a couple collaborators, and the one of the collaborators was an older dude, and I can tell from the records that she showed me that he wrote, he wasn't with the times, because he was pulling from the references, but he wasn't on top of like, yes, you can pull from those references, but it doesn't sound like 2024. It sounds like 1995, the way he handled the 60s and 70s references. And you have to know the entire trajectory up until 2024 to make that 1960s sound still feel current.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I never really thought about it that way, but it's like, I love pop punk. Like I grew up listening to that kind of stuff. Like,
you and everyone else in this country.
Yeah, not necessarily like Blink. I'm a little too young for the Blink 182 era. I was more like the I don't know if you're familiar with like All Time Low or like All American Rejects, like that, like next generation of pop punk.
I've heard of them. If it was a worldwide hit, it would have ended up in MTV in Holland. Otherwise, I don't know. Like I've never heard a Yellow Card. People like, you've never heard of Yellow Card? I have no idea what that means. Because it didn't make it all the way to Holland. You know what I mean?
So that being said, though, like it's interesting.
Sorry, keep going.
No. Yeah, but it's interesting to see now. Pop punk is kind of making a resurgence in pop music these days. Whether it be, like just what's going viral on TikTok, or whether it be Olivia Rodrigo, or even Machine Gun Kelly doing this like pop punk thing. And it's interesting to see like where people are doing it, and it's like, okay, that's cool. It sounds just like pop punk. But then there's people like that you could tell, I guess, grew up on it and like really know the references that are now reincarnating it. And it's like, look, Machine Gun Kelly's like 30 years old. Like he wasn't and I think it sounds pretty authentic. Like
yes,
Olivia
exactly.
Rodrigo, it sounds really authentic as opposed to the people that like, know of it, but it's not true to them. And then,
yes.
It's very interesting. Kind of like in retrospect of like, oh, that's why it doesn't sound dated. It sounds a refreshed version of something that happened before.
It's made with love.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can tell the love by the knowledge of the past and by loving all these things. If you do it in a cynical way, it's gonna shine through.
Yeah.
And people will know. It really does. And it's again like it's this very vague, this very kind of floating in the air statement of like, well, if you do it with love, it'll shine through. But that's really what it is, because music is a very subjective and in a way a very floaty kind of thing. Why do people love a certain song? Who knows? But why do you know what I mean? Like, why do we hate artist X and why do we love artist Y? Why do we hate song X? Why do we love song Y? Why is song 8 on the album the one that blows up and the rest of the songs don't? Because I don't know, because floaty magic particles that everyone seems to respond to, and you can't really analyze it that way. Except love, I don't know. You know, it's the fifth dimension in the Interstellar movie. You know what I mean? It's
exactly
the fourth dimension, I guess.
Yeah.
I think the that's what I'm learning is this alchemy that you can't really analyze.
Yeah.
And because I like to analyze everything, because that's where I come from. I'm super analytical, right? Yeah. So why does X, Y, and Z not, or why does 1, 2, 3 not equal 4? Because love or whatever. And that means nothing, but also it means everything.
Well, it's like that. It's like the classic cliche of like, there's no rules in love kind of thing. There's no rules in love and war kind of thing, right? And it's like, but it's the truth. Like 1 + 2 does not equal 3 with love. You know what I mean? It's like, because that's a great analogy. Because you said, you're like, I'm super analytical too, and I'm like, wait, 1 + 2 should equal 3, but it doesn't. And why doesn't it here? Like, what's going on? And it's the love aspect of it, which is crazy.
It's the fairy dust.
It sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth, man.
Yeah, it's the fairy dust, and it's also why, you know, it really didn't click for me until I started figuring that part for myself.
Yeah.
3-4 years ago, and all of a sudden now, anytime I make a record that I truly love, I can always say like that was well written, right? Because there's a part of me that has done the 20,000 hours of writing songs, and I know a song that's well written, and that's completely fine. And if it's not a song that I like is in my bones, or a style that's in my bones, or a lyric that's in my bones, I'll come to friends and be like, hey, what do you think? Is this something that, you know, I need people's reassurance? Like 4 or 5 friends that I always call and text and be like, what do you think of this? And if enough of them say this is great, I'm like, sweet, I trust you guys. I think it's great too. But there's records that I do myself that specifically for a lot, you know, Sex on the Beach, the artist project that I work on, that's like my passion project. And I know it's great because I think it's great, because I love it. I don't need anyone to tell me that, because this is the music that I literally grew up on.
Yeah.
And people come to me with that kind of stuff. Like, hey, do you think this is like the right kind of groove, or is this the right kind of movement, or is this stanky enough, or is this swinging enough, or is this lazy enough, or is this lyric weird enough, or any of the 1,000 reasons why I might get stank face? Because, you know, that's the term we all use. If you go this,
exactly,
that's good. You know what I mean? Yeah. If something gives me stank face, I know it's where it's supposed to be, and until it does, I don't think it's there yet.
Yeah.
But I only get stank face from stuff that I grew up on, because that's the stuff that's in my bones.
Yeah, and somebody else might get it from something else.
Somebody else might get it from, you know, from Metallica or whatever, and that's totally fine. I'm not going to be the barometer of what's like a great what's a great Metallica record.
Yeah, it's true.
I just can't do it.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And again, that's just because that was my background, and that was the thing I had to learn, which is like, use your full past, use your full background in the art you make. You know how to write a pop song. Now, how do you make it yours in a way that sets you apart as a brand? Like for writers and producers, you still have to have a brand. You're the guy or the girl that does this thing.
Oh, that's very
People
interesting.
Have to know.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I thought branding was just for artists, but in a way, like, your reputation is your brand. If people think Ben Samama, usually they think one thing, right? They think, well, now currently it's K-pop, because that's where most of my work is. But, you know, they think either big sexy ballads, because a lot of my cuts have been big sexy ballads, or like big dramatic male records, or hopefully soon Sex on the Beach, which is like the project I'm working on most. And that is like nasty funk record mixed with like dance beats, basically, in a very unexpected way. And it's very strange, and I love it so much. And in a K-pop, it's a lot of like,
I want to check it out after the fact. So how do I Google that without getting Sex on the Beach?
SECS, sex, seconds.
Oh,
it's a pun. Yeah, it's a pun that Eric came up with, and I think it's very clever.
Wait, so SECS,
seconds, SECS on the beach, and we just started, and we've got a ton of buzz going on in the sync world with it.
Oh, really?
Something we never expected. We specifically didn't write it for sync, but it just happens to be that everyone who's a music supervisor is like, oh, this is the new wave, and I'm like, is it? Sweet.
I mean, that's sick, dude. Like,
I'll take it.
That's an artist. You know, it's not on the radio,
absolutely.
but he's making you can make a nice buck with that for sure.
Yeah, you can, and and we weren't setting out to make that. We just thought
Sure,
this is the
of
two
course.
things
Absolutely.
we love most. And I think it's specifically because it wasn't made to do a thing specifically. It was just what we loved most. That's what shines through. Again, the love shines through.
Dude, it's so interesting, man. Like with like songwriting and full-time jobs and right, the balance between doing what you love and doing what currently makes money is such an interesting balance because like
No, I agree.
you know, like for somebody that like maybe hasn't made a career in music yet, it can be a really really hard thing. But like you know, you want to make money from music and you're like, okay, well, like I can choose, like for example, Pink Floyd, like
Yeah.
the amount of courage it actually took to make something that they love, like that was so avant-garde at the time when the Dark Side of the Moon, like
Yeah.
but like it worked, and like as opposed to being like they could have done something that made money, and it probably could have made money because they were all great musicians, but like it wouldn't have been the iconic thing that it is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides of the story for me. I think there's the one that because you use, an example of where somebody had success with that attitude, with that, yes, Pink Floyd for sure, but how many bands did that exact same
That's
thing?
also true. Yeah, you're right. That's a great point.
But also, Pink Floyd wouldn't be Pink Floyd if they didn't do Pink
Yeah.
Floyd.
No, you're right.
So
Because how many people did have that passion project that got six?
I fully agree.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, exactly. But currently, listen, music industry is hard. It's a hard place, right? Making music is really, really fun. And that's why people stay in it, because making music is amazing. The people that you do it with is amazing. Music business is a complicated subject, but there is a lot of it that is understandable. Music industry is tough.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to make money in music is tough. Trying to find this place where you make the money and you also don't hate your life, right? So
100%.
Finding both, it's a really, really tough place.
Yeah.
And I don't envy anyone that gets to it in the industry right now, because for one, it's very, very saturated, right? There is competition any corner. If you want to do sync, competition. If you want to do K-pop, there's competition. If you want to like write pop music in LA, oh my God, there's competition, because you're not just competing with, your friends, you're also competing with Ryan Tedder.
Yeah.
And with Max Martin,
Yeah.
and with the top of the top of the top geniuses that have an entire team around them, right? I mean, I know all of it because I'm in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not shading anybody, because the industry doesn't really care about, this new kid that's in the block who's like, well, let's give him a shot. Of course not. They want the best song.
Yeah.
And the best songs come from the people that have been doing it the longest, that know what a best song even is.
Yeah.
So, I've been at this for a long time. I've been in this, I've been in LA for 9 years now, and I've seen most sides of it. And I found my little corner, and I made my money, and I'm still making my money, fortunately. In the meantime, I'm also still learning, like, what is the thing you got to do to get to X, Y, and Z? Mm-hmm. Do I even want to get to X, Y, and Z? Do I want the heartache of, beating myself up because I don't have X, Y, and Z just yet? Or do I love what I make with the people I love to make it with?
Yeah.
And if the big one comes, then amazing. And if it doesn't, I'm still stoked.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And that's a conversation that I have with myself all day long, because, of course you want the big sexy number one record in the US, but, there's a lot of that is luck, and a lot of that is chaos because TikTok these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that part of the industry is more ephemeral and more opaque than people think it is. I think, you're currently hot because you got lucky 3 times in a row, and now you get all the opportunities. Yeah. Amazing. But in the same breath, 4 years later, all these guys have no work, or girls have 100%. No work. And it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And as long as you do what you love, that either hurts or it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think is the rule here. And yeah, it took me a long time to make money in this industry, and we can come back to the immigration thing as well, because I wasn't allowed to have a day job, right? I needed to make rent by way of music, which is a very complicated thing when no one knows who you are, and why would anyone pay you if they don't know who you are?
Yeah.
You don't really have like a track record or anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's a whole different subject. But generally, I think because 1, TikTok is chaos.
Yeah.
2, music industry is tough. 3,
yeah.
People will feel it when you don't love what you make, and it'll always feel a little cynical, so that it will never break through. The answer is love what you do, man, because and like pick what you love the most and then do that and become really, really good at it, because that's what breaks through. That's what sets you apart. In my personal case, that's like my background as like the son of two classical musicians who has been listening to Bach and Beethoven and Shostakovich and whatever since I was a kid, since I was born. That stuff lives inside me. I don't even think about it. It just comes out if I want to. And then my brother gave me when I was playing video games since I was 14 to 18, like 10 hours a day, because that's what you do when you're 14. I just listened to the same tape on repeat because I was lazy and I just didn't think about it. And it was a mixtape of Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, Jackson 5. I didn't think about it. I just, that one is always on because I was a lazy boy and I just had it on when I was playing Halo. That's why it's in my system. I blame my brother for me being obsessed with the 60s and 70s music. It's because that was the CD that he gave me. And it's been on repeat for 4 straight years.
Yeah.
That's what I pull from because that's what I love. Now, this is how it came to be. And again, like now that I make the music that I love and I really know, and I use all my artsy-fartsy background inside my pop music, shit is moving and it's moving fast. And that's only because, sure, I'm learning how to produce and I know how to sell my ideas better and I'm becoming a better writer because I'm working with better writers, all these things, but also people can feel the love. And they don't know why and they don't know how, but they can say, ooh, that makes me feel good or makes me feel emotional, as opposed to analytically, that's a good song, but why don't I feel anything? Usually those records die in a second.
They might have a little bit of a flash in a pan, but then they don't last anywhere.
Well, artists, like A&Rs will hear it, be like, yeah, that's a good record, but I don't feel nothing. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's always correct, because there's records on the radio that make me feel nothing. But then I'm assuming that, I'm assuming that means that I'm not the one to judge that record because I don't have the background. Like I'm sure the people who wrote that record have the breadth of knowledge in that style that they bring from their background. And it's not for me. That record wasn't for me. And I can say, yes, analytically, that is a well-written record. Congratulations. I feel nothing. That just means that it's not for me. I'm not the audience for that. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's very interesting. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got a day ahead of you, and I appreciate you hanging out with me.
All good.
I want to. I like to end these conversations all with the same question. I ask the same question to everybody. So, what is one thing that you now know in your career that you wish you knew when you first started out?
I should have learned how to produce
way
earlier.
That's interesting. That's a hot take. I appreciate that.
I'll tell you why. Because I've learned that what sets me apart is my musical background, and I never knew how to sell it as an idea until I learned how to produce it first. My musical background, like for example with Runaway, the reason that the band liked it, the OneRepublic liked the song and the idea that I had, it was this very rudimentary idea. It worked because the production around it, because the drum beat, because the feeling around it was interesting and different. If it was just this germination of a melody, they'd be like, yeah, that's good, but where does it go really? It was the fact that the drums were weird, that the guitars were weird, that the chords were a little wacky, all these things that I loved about that original idea that I did with them. That's what set it apart. But I had to make this like very rudimentary idea as a production, be like, this is my vision. And the vision of it is what made them excited, and then we worked it out together to where it ended up being. I realized that for most of the records that I'm a part of, that I really love, that's because the music part of it is something I produce out first and be like, this is the thing that makes it cool. Yes, lyrics, yes, melody, all these things. But listen to that crazy drum beat, or listen to that like reference from 1982 Police era, or listen to that reference from like 1967, rock and roll era. Like these are all references that part of what I think I'm good at as a writer and a producer is having that vision of that era. But unless I sell it the right way, people won't get it. You can't walk into a session and be like, hey, what if we do X? And they're like, okay, well, what if? But I walk into a session and say, listen to this thing. Isn't that cool? If we work it out X, Y, and Z. And most of the times people are like, yes, I agree with that. That's
really interesting, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a really, really great conversation. And we
of course
talked about some really cool things. And I think some of the viewers will, I have a lot of hot takes to take out of here and be able to,
Uh-oh.
no, in a good way, As a songwriter, like, I mean, it was even speaking to me as a songwriter. It's like, focusing on what I want to do as opposed to, what I think will sell or what I think will go viral. Like, just be you.
Yeah.
It's the oldest story in the book, but it's so easy to get lost
I know
in
it
that.
sounds so cliche, and I think
But
because it was so cliche, I fought
true.
it.
Well, exactly. But cliches are cliches because they're true, right? Or stereotypes are stereotypes because they're true, right? Like, it's the same thing with here. Like, it's as cliche and as silly as it sounds, it's really it's pretty simple, So
In a way, yeah. I learned very slowly, and I'm realized that I keep telling myself, why didn't I learn how to produce when I was 14? And I probably wouldn't have been ready for it. I wouldn't know what to do with it.
There's a phrase that I hear
what I
that
mean?
goes, "I'm slow, but I'm worth waiting for."
Hey, I like that one. That's exactly right. Yeah,
Well,
that applies to me as well.
Ben, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. I definitely, I'll be checking out your music for sure, and then
Sure.
I'll put the links out and everything down below so everybody else can check
Thank
it
you
out.
so much. Absolutely.
But yeah, we'll talk soon. And if you can hang out for 30 more seconds, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that made it to the end of this video. You are a true one. Definitely check out Ben's stuff. Check out my stuff. I appreciate you guys as listeners and subscribers, and I'll see you in the next video. So God bless. Peace out. I'll see you later.